Welcome to the Lord's Word Facebook group. And we're going to get into Genesis 4 today. I want to take a moment to reflect on something that specifically that we covered in Genesis 3. And I want you to remember that we have from Genesis 3 the first prophecy in God's Word. And that was reflected in Genesis 3:15 through 17, and I'm just going to take us back to that for a moment and review that with you. And verse 15 says, "And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel." So that's talking about the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, but that Jesus will kill Satan in the end. And it says, "Unto the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee." And so we're going to move forward. I just wanted to point that out again, though, because that is the first prophecy in God's Word. So he's talking about, of course, Cain, who would be born as a twin with Abel, but Cain would be Satan's child, and Abel would be Adam's child as the father. And of course, Eve, the mother of all living, was with both children. She bare the twins. Okay, so I'm going to get started here in Genesis 4, verse 1. "And Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain, and said, I have gotten a man from the Lord." And then she says, Ish Yahweh is the actual Hebrew that she says at that point. She's really excited about this, and she's actually she's ignorant to what's taken place, and she's innocent. Verse 2, "And she again bare his brother Abel, and Abel was a keeper of sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground." Okay, we need to take a look at this verse. And what is it that we're going to be taking a look at? This word "again." The word "again" that is used here, if you take it back in the Hebrew, the word actually is, and I'm going to take a peek here at my notes, it comes from the root for Yasaf. That's the Hebrew. And it means, if you transliterate it, it means to continue to do a thing. So if you're giving birth to a child and you're continuing to do this thing, then you're giving birth to a second child. So these are twins. And that's what I wanted to point out here. Verse 3, "And in process of time it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord." Okay, he did bring an offering, but is it his first fruits? Is it the best of what he grew? It certainly doesn't say that if that's the case. Verse 4, "And Abel, he also brought of the firstling of his flock and of the fat thereof. The Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering." He brought the firstling. He brought the first fruits. He brought the first unblemished lamb that he had available to give it to God. And Cain didn't do that. Cain brought just some of his crop to give to God. Now, another point that I want to make here is, in the Jewish tradition, you came of age at 12 years old, and when that happened, you suddenly had to make sacrifice in the temple for God. That's part of accountability, and of course, because we have sin in the world. So this is part of the traditions that they have to do. Now, why would both of them have this sacrifice to give to the Lord on the same day? Well, the only way that could be possible is if they're twins. They're born on the same day. So their age of accountability and their sacrifice is due to the Lord on the same day. Okay, take a note, check your notes here. One note about these twins. These are paternal twins. They are not identical twins. Okay, identical twins are from one father, one sac, and then there's two children. With paternal twins, you actually have two different sacs, and it's possible for them to be two different fathers. And it is, in this case, that Cain is of Satan's seed and Abel is of Adam's seed. Okay, and then the last point here to be made is that Abel is a shepherd who is talking about our people. He was for our people. And Cain is a tiller of the soil. And so there would always be a problem because Kenites would not be able to produce from the soil. And we'll get into that more in the teachings as we move along here. 5. But unto Cain and to his offering he had not respect. And Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell. So he was pretty upset. Verse 6. And the Lord said unto Cain, Why art thou wroth? And why is thou countenance fallen? In other words, what's got you so PO'd? And verse 7, we'll go on. If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door. And unto thee shall be desire, and thou shalt rule over him. He's basically talking about, and we already know this is Cain, so we know he's not of good seed. We know that he's not able to be honest, and so we already know where he falls in this. So verse 8, and Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against his brother and slew him. Now, scholars will actually tell you that Cain coerced his brother to a field to talk. So there was a little bit more to it than that. He wanted to get him to a place where other people probably weren't around to see what was going to take place. And verse 9, and the Lord said unto Cain, Where is Abel thy brother? And he said, I know not. Am I my brother's keeper? Verse 10, and he said, What hast thou done? The voice of thy brother's blood crieth unto me from the ground. So what's he talking about here? He's talking about not only that he slew Abel, but Abel's generations, all of those souls that would have been born to this family through Abel. And now they're all crying out because that isn't going to happen. Verse 11, don't worry though, God's going to take care of this. So verse 11, and now art thou cursed from the earth, which hath opened her mouth to receive fully thy brother's blood from thy hand. In other words, he was guilty of killing his brother. He spilled his brother's blood on the ground. Verse 12, when thou tillest the ground, it shall not henceforth yield unto thee her strength. A fugitive and a vagabond shalt thou be in the earth. In other words, the earth was never going to produce for Cain nor his seed forever on the earth. Verse 13, and Cain said unto the Lord, My punishment is greater than I can bear. Verse 14, behold, thou hast driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from thy face shalt I be hid, and I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth. And it shall come to pass that every one that findeth me shall slay me. Now wait a minute, who we're talking about? We're just talking about the Adamic family. We have Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel. Who's these other people that are going to slay him? Oh, that's right. We have the sixth day creation. They're already here. They've been here about 2,000 years now. So there are other people on the planet. All the races, every single race is already on the planet. This specific family is just a different family. Verse 15, and the Lord said unto him, therefore, whosoever slayeth Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him. Now, what is this mark? A lot of people have mistakenly tried to label this mark as a color, as how the first race possibly came into being, that he was marked perhaps as black, and so that's where the black race came from. That could not be further from the truth. It is a bald-faced lie. The races were placed here by God. When God created all of the people on the sixth day, he said it was very good. He was very pleased with what he had created. What we're not talking about any difference in people here. We're just talking about these people now, Cain and Abel, are from the Adamic lineage of Jesus Christ himself. So what they're talking about in this verse are those sixth-day people. Cain is fearful that these people will kill him or slay him. And Cain, verse 16, and Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. So on the east of Eden, in the land of Nod, is where some of these sixth-day creation people are living. Verse 17, and Cain knew his wife, and she conceived, and bare Enoch. And he builded a city, and called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. Now I want you to pay attention to the names here, because in Genesis 4 we are covering Cain's genealogy. And in chapter 5 we will cover Adam's genealogy. Why? Because they're different. Cain has a different father, and it isn't Adam. You won't find Cain in Adam's genealogy when we get there. And so the point that I want to make here, though, is that throughout the Bible, as Satan, as the adversary, constantly is trying to replicate what God is doing. And so the names in the lineage for Satan or Cain are very similar to the names in Adam's genealogy, but they are different. So I just want you to make a note of that. Verse 18, and unto Enoch was born Irad, and Irad begat Mehujael. Now it's like Methuselah, but not quite. Mehujael. And Mehujael begat Methusael. And Methusael begat Lamech. Okay, so Lamech is and Methusael of God is in that name. When it ends with L, L is always God. So you know that the name is set that way. Verse 19, and Lamech took unto him 2 wives. The name of the one was Ada, and the name of the other Zillah. Verse 20, and Ada bare Jabal. He was the father of such as dwell in tents, and of such as have cattle. Verse 21, and his brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all such as handle the harp and organ, so musicians. And verse 22, and Zillah, she also bare Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every artifice in brass and iron. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Nim. Okay, so Tubal-Cain was an iron worker. And I think I have a note. What do I have about Nin? I skipped some notes here, and so we're going to have to backtrack here a little bit. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and take a break here because what I needed to do is make a couple other points. I wanted to reference some information about teachings of Christ. The teachings of Christ support all of this information from the Old Testament when we get to the New Testament. And so I want to take you over to Matthew. And I want to take you to chapter 23 and verse 33. And if you want to go over there with me. Now, Christ is talking to the scribes and the Pharisees, specifically the Kenites. Who are the Kenites? The Kenites are the children or the sons of Cain. Kenites are Kenites. And you can look that up in the concordance to verify that this is factual according to God's word. So Matthew 23:33. Ye serpents, ye generation of vipers, how can ye escape the damnation of hell? So who's he talking to? He's talking to the children of Satan. Verse 34. Wherefore, behold, I send unto you prophets, and wise men, and scribes, and some of them ye shall kill, and crucify. And some of them shall ye scourge in your synagogues, and persecute them from city to city. Verse 35. That upon you may come all the righteous blood shed upon the earth, from the blood of the righteous Abel unto the blood of Zacharias son of Barachias, whom ye slew between the temple and the altar. See, so this is already confirming. We are talking about the sons of Satan. And another place that we want to go to here to confirm this information also, I want to take you over to the first epistle of John, and that would be chapter 3, verse 11. For this is the message that ye heard from the beginning. When? The beginning. That ye should love one another. Now, do you remember that? Jesus taught that, and we heard that from the. In verse 12, not as Cain, who was of that wicked one. Who was the wicked one? And slew his brother. Okay, so we know who we're talking about. Of the wicked one is of Satan, and Cain slew his brother. And wherefore slew he him? Because his own works were evil, and his brothers were righteous. In other words, God had accepted Abel's sacrifice, but he was angry with Cain for his less than perfect sacrifice. It wasn't that it was from the ground, it was that it wasn't the best that he produced from the ground. He just kind of took a portion of it and said, okay, this portion's for God. Whereas Abel took the very best of his lamb, the one that was without blemish, and that's what he provided to God for his sacrifice. Okay, and then the last spot where I also wanted to confirm the same information, okay? So I want to show you in all these different places that God doesn't hide any of this from us. And he's been telling us all of these things all along. So if we go to St. John, chapter 8, verse 44, and it reads, ye are of your father, the devil, and the lusts of your father ye will do. He was a murderer from the beginning. Who was a murderer from the beginning? And abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, He speaketh of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it. Okay, we're talking about Cain. And that's all we need to cover here. Because basically, we're just trying to show you again that in different places throughout the gospel, Christ tries to make you aware of this first part in Genesis. Because, see, if you don't understand the truth of what's in the very beginning of Genesis, these first 6 chapters, you're going to be really confused throughout the Bible as to what we're speaking about and what Christ is trying to teach us. Okay, so I want to go ahead and jump back over now to where I left us. And so verse 23 is where I had left off. And Lamech said unto his wives, Adah and Zillah, Hear my voice, ye wives of Lamech, hearken unto my speech. For I have slain a man to my wounding, and a young man to my hurt. Verse 24. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 70 and sevenfold. That would mean 490 times. 70 and sevenfold. So it's 70 times 7, which is 490 times. Verse 25. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bare a son, and called his name Seth. For God, said she, hath appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. And it's important to understand this is where God is indeed continuing the seed for the lineage for Christ. So yes, Abel was slain by Cain, but God still is able to fulfill his plan with a child from Adam and Eve, and that is Seth. Verse 26. And to Seth, to him also there was born a son, and he called his name Enos. Then began men to call upon the name of the Lord. So at this point, they were already starting, even of the lineage of Cain. They're starting to recognize that they need the Lord, and they're starting to actually call upon him. Now, just because they're born of Satan doesn't ever mean that they don't serve God. And I just kind of want to make that point. Just because you're born of the Kenite race, this does not mean that you cannot have salvation. You always have an opportunity for salvation. So if you want to change from the ways of Satan and move from your genealogy of that evil and come into the truth and God's light, it's always possible for a Kenite to do that. And then they're a child of God. They're no longer a child of Satan because they've accepted the truth and they've come into the light. And then that's the end of Genesis 4, and we're going to move on to Genesis 5 in our next lesson. I appreciate your spending your time with me, and I look forward to bringing you the next lesson.